This morning, we need to all be historians this morning. Now, I've met some of you before, and I'm sure some of you have heard me say this before as well. But being a historian, and the way I think about it, is that being a historian is a little bit like being a detective. Because the job of a detective is to find clues and to find evidence. And that's exactly what a historian does too. A historian finds clues and evidence, not about a crime though, but about the past, about history. It could be something that happened thousands upon thousands of years ago, or it can be something that happened yesterday, or even this morning. Now, a very famous historian from Merthyr Tydfil, actually, from Dowlas, called Gwyn Alf Williams, said this: "The past is chaos. We in the present, that's us now, to make sense of that chaos, we need to ask questions. And the questions will be different depending on who you are, what you are, when you are. We will all think and ask different questions. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to ask and think about some good questions. And from those questions, we're hopefully going to get some good answers as well. Now, for your teachers this morning, I'd like to remind you that we will be recording this workshop this morning. And because of that, we're going to ask that you keep your cameras and your microphones off for the duration of the workshop. And any questions that you have for me or for Richard Trevithick when he joins us shortly, if you could pop those into the chat with the name of the pupil and the class that they're in and they're asking the question from. But to begin our workshop today, we're going to need to think back, think like a historian, think to a time when Merthyr Tydfil was a very different place. Because here in Merthyr Tydfil, on the 21st of February, 1804, something happened here that changed the history of the world. The very first steam locomotive to run on rails. And that event occurred right here in Merthyr Tydfil. But Merthyr Tydfil back then was a very different place. If you came here, you wouldn't find the luscious green valleys that you found today. You would have found a place that people at the time described as hell. A town with 4 major ironworks, a town becoming known throughout the entire world for taking the raw ingredients of coal, ironstone, and limestone, taking them to huge blast furnaces, ovens that would melt those ingredients down to create the metal iron. And it's that iron that Merthyr Tydfil would become famous for. It's that iron that would bring people to Merthyr Tydfil from all around the world. And it's that iron that with it would come amazing inventions and new technological improvements and achievements. Now, to find out more about the man himself, we're going to get a chance now to ask him all of those questions that we've been thinking about. So I'd like to invite Richard Trevithick to join us today to talk to us all.
Morning.
Morning. Happy birthday, Captain Dick.
Thank you. I'm going to celebrate later on today, but no, not this early in the morning.
Fantastic. So what we're going to do today, Mr. Trevithick, is that we're going to be able to ask the pupils, or the pupils will be able to ask us all of the questions that they have been thinking about, all of the questions that they have been burning to ask you about your time in Merthyr Tydfil and all of the inventions that you came up with, and the fact that some of your inventions have changed our lives today, hundreds of years later. So I'd like to now invite the teachers and invite the pupils to begin to add some of their questions to the chat. But I've got a question for you as well, Mr. Trevithick. I'd like to know, what was your first impressions of Merthyr Tydfil? What was the thing that you saw when you came here?
Well, I saw Merthyr Tydfil from a long way off. Because when I first come to Merthyr Tydfil, I was arriving there toward eventide, as it was getting dark. And in the distance, I could see the reflections of the fires from the furnaces shining down from the clouds. That was quite a shock for me.
Wow, wow. It sounds like it was very different today, and what a sight it must have been.
Oh, it was. It was. Well, one of the fellows who was with me said, "Are we going to be driving up there into hell?"
Fantastic. Now, we've already got some questions to ask you, Mr. Trevithick, so let me dig some of these out. Okay, this is a really interesting one. How did you contribute to the Industrial Revolution? And this is from Alfie from Pioneer 2.
Well, that's a wonderful question. Of course, I was involved with working with engines, steam engines, ever since I was a young lad. At the time, the steam engines didn't work right well. And so, over the years, I designed ways to make them more efficient, to pump harder, move heavier loads. And likewise, I invented here the steam engine that would actually move itself and pull loads behind it. So I think I made a major contribution. Of course, I did lots of other things as well, like invented machines for boring holes right through iron bars to make cannon. And I even invented a barge that was powered by steam that could dredge soil out of rivers and the like. Oh, I was very active.
Wow, that's amazing. You're a very busy man, Mr. Trevithick. Okay, let's dig out another question. Oh, okay, so this is from Grace in C13 at Cyfarthfa Park Primary. What inspired you to become an engineer?
That's a hard question to answer, really. My father, he was the manager, as we would say, the captain of a mine in Cornwall. And I wasn't all that keen on school. I didn't like my teacher much. I'm not like, my teacher wasn't like your teachers. He was really nasty. And so sometimes I wouldn't even bother to go to school. I'd leave the house, but I'd go down and go around the mines and learn from engineers working in the mines, the tin mines and the clay mines in Cornwall. And I could see, I was really excited by seeing how their machines would work. And that's how I found that I had a mind that could look at a machine and see ways of making it better. So that's what inspired me, working and being with engineers who are older than what I am.
Wow, that sounds amazing. It sounds like the mines became your school and those engineers became your teachers.
Oh, indeed they did. Oh, I went to school. I could learn, I could write. No, I couldn't spell for toffee, but I was right good with numbers. And if you want to become an engineer, you've got to be able to work with numbers and calculate. And so it was that the engineers in the mines, they even helped me improve my mathematics.
Okay, so this is from Emily Ray at Pioneer 3. How did Samuel Humphrey find you? And why do you think he chose you over another engineer?
Well, first, I first met Mr. Humphrey after I'd been working as an engineer for quite a while. And in fact, I'd already designed and made machines that would run on a road engines. I even took the parts up to London and built a road engine that would go round and round the streets of London there. And Mr. Humphrey, he came to hear about not my road engines so much, but the ways in which I had made steam engines pump better and lift heavier loads and the like down in Cornwall. And he asked me, would I come up? And I come up in 1803 to Merthyr to build some engines to go in the yard, in his ironworks yard, for pumping water and driving hammers and the like. So he heard of me because of my successes in other places.
So Logan from C12 has a good question. Why did they refer to Mirtha as hell?
Oh, well. Now I come from Cornwall, and Cornwall was very much quieter than Merthyr Tydfil was. And as I said, when we did ride up to Merthyr Tydfil that very first evening, we looked as though we were going into the fires of hell itself. Now, there were 4 enormous ironworks in Merthyr Tydfil, all of them with furnaces, all of them producing iron and heat and light and smoke and fumes. When I come to Merthyr, I was amazed to see how many people there were living in the place. Because from Iluggan, where I was, 'twas a small town. There were tin mines round about, but nothing as big as Merthyr Tydfil. And I was woken but first morning by the sound of the birds in Merthyr Tydfil. They weren't singing, they were coughing. All the smoke and all the fumes. I was amazed. I thought hell couldn't be worse than this. And to be honest, the way the people were living there, they didn't have fresh water to drink or to wash with or cook. They were living in filthy conditions. And the streets, well, the streets were covered in mud in many a place. Oh, Merthyr looked like hell right enough to many people who come to visit.
Wow, it sounds like Merthyr Tydfil has changed a lot, but it still sounds like it was an amazing place all the way back then as well. We do have some more questions for you as well, Mr. Trevithick. Let's dig another one out. Okay. So Hayden from Pioneer 2 would like to ask, how long did it take you to build the steam engine?
Oh, no, that's a right interesting question, that, isn't it? Now, you must know that I had built steam engines before. 1801, now, I built a steam engine that would travel on the road. And in fact, me and my cousin Andrew Vivian, we took her for a ride into Camborne, and she did break down while we were there. So I'd already designed and built a steam engine that could move. So the ideas were there, the plans were already in my mind. Now, when I come up to build steam engines, stationary ones that would pump and that would work hammers and the like for Mr. Humphrey, he asked me, could I make one that would move and pull behind it drams of iron down from Merthyr Tydfil down to a little place called Abercynon. And what I did was I cheated just a little bit, because I built him an engine for pumping. And what I did was I took that engine and made a few alterations. I put wheels on her, and so that became my locomotive. And that took us 3 or 4 months to achieve. But I was lucky because we had all the iron that we required, and I could have as many men to help me working as I needed. And so it took us about 3 months, I would say, a good 3 to 4 months.
Amazing. So it sounds like Mirtha actually provided you with everything you needed to do that, not just the materials, but the expertise of the workmen, and just the amazing situation that Mirtha was at that time as well, to give you the inspiration to do that. Now, Zach from C12 has another interesting question for you. He says, were the first people to go on the locomotive the well-off people?
Oh, bless you, no, they weren't, no. I had a shock the morning that we fired her up ready to take her. We'd put 10 drams of iron behind her, right? 5 drams of iron with 2 tons of iron in each one. And look you now, when we started off, it was the poorer sort that left on the back to have a free ride. Now, your rich people, oh no, they wouldn't like to ride on an open carriage sitting on rough, dirty iron with all the smoke and fumes coming back from the engine into their faces and getting wet on a February morning. No, it were the poor people. The rich people, they sort of held their noses up in the air and wouldn't have come close to have a ride on the back of something as rough and as dirty as the drams of iron behind my locomotive.
That's amazing. I wonder if those people knew that they were part of this world-changing event. So Ellie May from Pioneer 2 would like to ask, how many other steam engines did you make after the first one? So I think after the Penydarren locomotive, did you go on to make any more?
Oh, I did, yeah. I went on to make an engine up close to Newcastle. I made one at Ironbrook. I made one likewise to make money in London. We built ourselves a circular track in London, and I put a locomotive on it, and I would charge people a shilling a ride, and I would even race it against a horse, but didn't make enough money really to make me a rich man. I went on and built steam engines to power ships. I built steam engines. I even went out to Peru in South America to build engines, steam engines to pull loads, and steam engines to lift loads out of the mines down there, the silver mines.
Now, we have a really quite long question here, so bear with me with this one, Mr. Trevithick. Aidan from Pioneer 3 at Abercanet would like to ask this. Did Humphrey tell you about the bet? If not, how did you feel when he placed the bet on your creation without your knowledge? If he did tell you, how did you feel about the bet as a whole? Were you getting any cut out of the bet if Samuel would have won?
Oh, what an interesting question. I mean, he didn't tell me about it straight away, because, truth to tell, I have the feeling that he'd had a meeting with Mr. Crochet, and Mr. Crochet had said when he found out about the scheme, it will never work. And Mr. Humphrey said, oh, yes, it will. And they had a little bet. It was later on I learned about the bet. At first, I was a little taken aback and a little surprised. But I wasn't worried about proving that my locomotive would work. I knew it would work. There was a big problem. The big problem was making a locomotive work on the road is easy, because the road is rough and the wheels can grab hold. But making it work with iron wheels on iron rails that might slip, weight of the locomotive, I was sure would give it enough traction to pull it along. So I was in no way worried about trying to prove how right I could be. Now, as to whether I got, what did he, a cut? I got lots of cuts working with metal, you always do. But if I think he means, did I get any money extra from Mr. Humphrey for proving it would work? Well, that's for me to know and you to find out, you nosy boy. But I was well paid for my work.
So we have some budding historians with us today, Mr. Trevithick, like Connor from C12 at Cyfarthfa Park Primary asked, who built the rails? And he's began to answer this question as well. He said the rails for the tramrails created at Penydarren, Plymouth and the Dowlas Works, they were made for trams and drams. So they looked very different from the rails that you would see today. But did you have any problems with the rails for your locomotive?
Yes, I did. I didn't have any problems getting rails because there were rails already laid down. The track was already laid down to Abercynon, so that the iron masters could work their way around the top part of the canal. The problem with the iron rails was they were made out of cast iron. There are different kinds of iron. There's cast iron, that's the iron that comes straight out of the furnace and is poured into molds, goes hard when it goes cold. And there's wrought iron where it's beaten and a lot of the impurities are taken out. Now, the iron rails that were done were meant only to take the weight of single drams, 2 ton at a time. Now, my locomotive herself, she was weighing about 7 tons when there were coal on and water and the like. So we had problems with those. And the problems we had with those was that they were breaking up under the weight of the locomotive. And that's why she didn't prove to be successful. That's why she took over 4 hours to do 9 miles on her run, because some of the rails kept breaking and we had to replace them. No, I'm sure I didn't have any other problems with them. See, my rails now, they ran. My wheels ran on those rails beautifully, and they got lots of traction. I'm sure people in later times have made better rails and better wheels, but I was fairly happy with what we had, if they could only have been made stronger.
Fantastic. So Fallon in Pioneer 2 would like to ask this. Now, he's been looking a little bit more into your story, into your life, and he has found out that your career changed a little bit after you left Merthyr Tydfil. And he would like to ask, how did your career go so badly after making the first steam engine?
Ooh. Right, well, I got a restless mind, see. I likes a challenge. If I proved I can do something, I've always got the wish to move on. I will think of something else, and then I will devote all my energies and all my interests into that new project. And so I wanted to move on. The other thing, of course, is that I was having problems at the time with some of the most important engineers in the country, Messrs. Bolton and Watt. My steam engines were so much better than theirs were. My steam engines were working at higher pressures. And in London, one day, there was a boy looking after one of my steam engines for pumping, and he didn't pay good attention, and it exploded, and people got killed. And Mr. Bolton, Mr. Watt, oh, they spread terrible rumors about me. But although I never became a millionaire, people still looked up to me and still regarded me with respect, including Mr. Stevenson, who built another rail engine much later on.
Fantastic. It sounds like you had all the respect that you deserved at the time, Mr. Trevithick. Okay, so we have another question actually about the bet that occurred. So this is from Grace in Pioneer 3. She'd like to ask, how did you feel when the bet was voided? And why was the bet voided? Was it because it didn't complete the journey to Abercynon and back on the same day because of a broken bolt? Or was it because the train broke the track because of its weight? Now, we've found out lots about this bet, and for us historians, that bet is a really interesting idea that we've been trying to explore a little bit more. But can you tell us what you remember about that time?
Well, what I remember about that was that the bet was that we had to take 10 ton down to Abercynon, bring it back under the engine's own steam all the way on the original track that was used by horses and by the drams. Now, that was a problem because the locomotive was taller than drams, it was wider than drams, and there were some places where we had to move the track a little to avoid, well, to make room for the locomotive to come through. So the track was altered just a little. And of course, on the way back from Abercynon, we lost a boat, and we had to have the locomotive and the drams behind her pulled back by horses to Merthyr Tydfil. So although I proved that the locomotive would work and would work quite efficiently, we didn't fulfill all the requirements of the bet. Now, Mr. Humphrey said, morally, we have won. And I'm sure Mr. Crawshay said to him, morally don't count. A bet is a bet, and you didn't satisfy all the terms. So that's what I remember about the bet.
Fantastic. Actually, following on from that, Grace from Cyfarthfa Park Primary, C13, says, what did you make of Richard Crochet as a person? How did he compare to Humphrey?
That's hard to say, really, because I didn't have much to do with Mr. Crochet. All I can say is I heard from other workmen about Mr. Crochet. And to be fair, a lot of the workmen who spoke to me about him had a lot of praise for him. They said, for example, that he would try to pay his workers a reasonable wage. He was fair to them. There was one man now who said that he was a religious fellow, and he vowed that he couldn't work on the Sabbath, the Sunday, for Mr. Crochet. He had to go to church, and Mr. Crochet said, well, what, you go and you say a prayer for me likewise. But he was a businessman. He'd made his money in iron. He'd fought his way up into a position where Cyfarthfa Ironworks was one of the leading ironworks in the world, and he wasn't going to throw away money unnecessarily.
Now, Amelia from Pioneer 3 at Abercanet would like to ask this. If you were to go back and change one thing, what would it be?
As far as, now I'm not sure what she means about this, as far as the locomotive and so on were concerned.
I think it's the locomotive, yes.
If we're talking about that, one of the things I would want to change would be the rails that the locomotive ran on. Now, we've already said a little bit about this. Now, it would have been possible to take up all the old weak rails and replace them with stronger rails, which is what I would have liked to have done. But that would have meant preventing the ironworks getting iron down to the canal for weeks and weeks and weeks. And that would mean Mr. Humphrey would lose a lot of money. And so I don't think that would have been possible at all. As far as my own life is concerned, well, I wish perhaps I had stuck with my locomotives for a little bit longer than I actually did, and worked on developing them as Mr. Stevenson did some years later.
Fantastic. Now we come into the end of our time with you today, Mr. Trevithick, so we're going to have one more question from our huge list of questions here. But what I'd like to say is that although we haven't got time to answer every question that's been sent to us, if the pupils or the teachers would like to email the questions over to me, we will get those answered and get them sent back to the classes. So let's pick out our final question. We'll pick this one at random, I think, here. Actually, we could probably put a few questions together. Now, we found out about the early part of your life, and we found out about your career as an engineer from the amazing things that you made and across the world and how you traveled across the world. But we have a few questions to find out how your life ended. So what happened towards the end of your life? We know that you traveled to Peru, but we know that you had quite a sad ending towards the end of your life. Could you tell us about that?
Peru was meant to make me a lot of money, but there were troubles in Peru. There was revolution, there was warfare, there was social unrest, there were bandits, there were all sorts of things that caused problems. And so in the end, I ran out of money in Peru. And in fact, it was one of the Stevensons who actually paid for my passage back home. And, well, projects later on didn't go too well for me after I came back. And I became bankrupt. That means I ran out of money completely. And so at the end of my life, I was dependent on kindness of other people for an awful lot of the time. It was sad, but there you are.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trevithick. It sounds like you had an amazing life and have an amazing story. And we'd like to thank you for Merthyr Tydfil for the huge contribution that you made to our history, the history that we are all so proud about. So, happy birthday, and we will leave you get back to your celebrations. Thank you, Mr. Trevithick.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for asking those children to come along and put their questions to me. If they want to ask me a question, they can ask me a question through you, and perhaps I can write to them and send them an answer, as long as they'll forgive my spelling, because my spelling is shocking.
Thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon.
I will
Bye-bye.
see you now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, children.